The greatest war in human history is raging right now. It is fought with words, laws, stories, and yes, with real bullets and real bombs. A war fought everywhere, all at once, on real battlefields abroad, and in the classrooms, homes, and streets of our own towns. In this special transmission of the Restless Signal, we cover the war that will determine the future of civilization and perhaps the soul of humanity itself. 4 rival visions for our world are locked in global combat. Only one can prevail. This is the War of Ideas. Thanks for joining me today. You've heard me say this before. This is the most important transmission yet. Well, I'm saying it again. Because today, what we're talking about cuts to the heart of everything this signal is about. Truth, meaning, and how we live well. And I want to be clear. When I speak of a war of ideas, I'm not speaking metaphorically. I'm not exaggerating. This is a war. It's fought on every front, with drones in the sky over Ukraine, with rockets in Israel and Gaza, with cyber weapons in the shadows of Beijing and Washington. But it's also fought closer to home, in classrooms where textbooks reshape how the next generation sees the world, in courts and legislatures where laws are rewritten to redefine family, justice, even truth itself, in Hollywood scripts, in TikTok clips, in corporate boardrooms, in the very words and symbols we are told we can or cannot use. These are not just policy fights. They are battles over truth and meaning itself, the very questions of who we are, what is right, and where we are going. This is the conflict we have been circling since the very beginning of the Restless Signal, sometimes implicitly when discussing the corruption of truth, meaning, and living well. Sometimes we've named it directly. But tonight, the mask is fully off. Tonight, the adversary stands in view. Beneath the headlines and the politics, 4 rival visions of civilization are locked in combat. Christianity and Islam root their order in God. Marxism promises utopia through revolution. Liberal humanism claims to offer freedom, equality, and autonomy. These visions are not compatible with one another. Each presses outward. Each claims universality. Each seeks to shape the world in its own image. That is why tonight we are stepping into the framework of the war, to ask, why ideas? Why these 4? Why can't they coexist? And what kind of future does each one hold out as its prize? Because the war of ideas is not just coming, it is here, and it will decide the destiny of nations and the soul of humanity. Before we go further, we need to answer the question, why a war of ideas? Why not a war of nations? Why not civilizations? Or economic systems, or even ethnicities? The answer is that ideas are what give all those things their force. Nations and governments rise and fall. Civilizations fracture. Economies shift. Even ethnicities, or the feelings about them, change over time. But civilizational ideas are what endure. They animate the great movements of history. Civilizations may look seamless from a distance, but within them lie deep fractures between sacred and secular, liberal and conservative, traditional and revolutionary. What binds nations and civilizations together, or tears them apart, are the ideas at their core. Samuel Huntington, in The Clash of Civilization, famously argued that civilizations would define the world after the Cold War. He was right to look beyond nation-state borders, but civilizations are not monoliths. The West itself is divided against itself. The civilizational lens that he used cannot fully explain why parts of the same heritage turn against one another so bitterly. Ideas can, because ideas cut across borders and across civilizations. Christianity does not belong to Rome alone, Islam not to Arabia, Marxism not to Moscow. Liberal humanism not to Paris or Washington. No, ideas can travel anywhere. They know no border, and in today's information age, ideas spread throughout the world in the time it would have taken to prep for the evening newscast just a generation ago. That is why I believe ideas are the main combatants in today's world that will determine our fate, not nations, not civilizations. You may be asking yourself, okay, but why these four in a world of so many ideas? Because these are not regional traditions with simply domestic concerns. They are universalist claims pressing outward, demanding to be true for all people, everywhere, always. And more importantly, because these ideas have the capacity to act on those claims. These four powers already shape the globe. They have the reach, the institutions, the adherence, and the momentum to contest for dominance, not only today, but for the foreseeable future. And at present, there does not appear to be a fifth rival ideology rising to supplant them at their level. That's why we focus on them. Now, it's true, none of these ideas is a clean monolith. Each contains sub-schools of thought, rival factions, and some internal contradictions. For example, Christianity is divided into Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant traditions. Islam between Sunni and Shia. Marxism fractured into Leninism, Maoism, and postmodern streams. Humanism and liberalism splintered into classic, progressive, and technocratic forms. These differences matter, and in future transmissions, we'll go deeper into them. But for today, we will treat them at the level 1 of the framework, as the four main combatants in the war of ideas. Each universal, each totalizing, each pressing outward, seeking to shape the world in its own image. So let's meet them now, starting with the oldest. Christianity was born in the 1st century in the Roman province of Judea, in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. From its very beginning, it made a radical claim that it was not a new religion, but the fulfillment of God's covenant with Israel, the extension of his promises to Abraham and David, now open to all of mankind. Where Israel was the chosen people, Christianity proclaimed that in Christ, all peoples could be adopted into God's family. Jesus himself established his church, promising that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. But Christ did not simply call his people to believe. He called them to holiness. He commanded them to love God above all and to love their neighbor as themselves. He taught forgiveness and mercy, but also paired it with justice. He demanded purity of heart, integrity of life, and courage in the face of persecution. He told his followers to take their cross and follow him, to walk the path he walked, even unto death, with the promise that eternal life lay beyond. And Jesus did not leave the door open to many truths. He declared, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Christianity is not a Unitarian fellowship of good vibes or vague spirituality. It's an exclusive claim that in Christ alone is salvation, and that every person and every nation ultimately owes him allegiance. And before ascending to heaven, Christ gave his followers the Great Commission to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Christianity's universal scope is baked into its DNA. From Jerusalem, Christianity spread throughout the Roman Empire by missionary preaching, often under persecution, until by the 4th century it was the empire's official faith. Over the next 2 millennia, it became the backbone of Western civilization, shaping law, art, philosophy, science, political order, and even the calendar. We number the years from the time of Christ's birth. Today, Christianity counts about 2.4 billion adherents worldwide. The Catholic Church, led by the Pope in Rome, is the largest Christian denomination and claims to be that church that Jesus founded 2,000 years ago, while Protestant and Orthodox traditions dispute that claim. Christianity is in retreat in much of Europe and North America, but growing rapidly in Africa and Asia. To Christians, Christ came for all nations, and the proof is that his church spans every culture and region on earth. Let's move forward to our next idea. Islam arose in the 7th century in the Arabian Peninsula, when Muhammad proclaimed himself the final prophet and received the Quran as the word of God. Within a century, Islam spread with astonishing speed, carried by armies, trade, and community life, from Spain to India. It forged a vast civilizational sphere that still endures today. Islam presents itself as the restoration of pure monotheism, correcting what it sees as the errors of both Judaism and Christianity. Jews, Christians, and Muslims are all people of the book, but Islam claims to supersede the earlier revelations. What does Islam ask of its people? Total submission to Allah. It calls men and women to prayer, fasting, almsgiving, pilgrimage, and confession of faith, the 5 pillars. But it also binds worship to law, family, and politics in one seamless order governed by Sharia. It asks for obedience not only in private devotion, but in public life, with the goal that every society be brought into conformity with Allah's law. And like Christianity, Islam is not pluralist. Its confession is absolute. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. By this claim, Islam denies Christ's lordship and insists that salvation is found only within the Ummah, the global community of believers. Christians, in turn, variously regard Islam as a grave heresy, faith that borrowed Christian concepts but stripped away Christ's divinity and the gospel of redemption. Or worse, some Christians believe that Muslims do not pray to the true God at all. This mutual exclusivity is why the two faiths so often collide and why they remain in conflict to this day. Today, Islam claims about 1.9 billion adherents, making it the second largest faith in the world. It dominates North Africa, the Middle East, and large portions of Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. It's growing demographically and expanding into Europe and North America through migration. Islam is not regional, it's universalist, pressing outward, claiming every people for the Ummah. The third great component is liberalism and modern secular humanism. Technically, they are separate ideologies, but they are so interwoven and interconnected, for purposes of our War of Ideas framework, we will treat them together. Liberalism was born in the 17th century out of Europe's wars of religion. John Locke, often called his father, argued that men are born with natural rights to life, liberty, and property, and the governments exist only by the consent of the governed to protect those rights. He cited the Bible constantly in his 2 treatises on government, grounding those rights in the Creator. Montesquieu added the innovation of separation of powers, and Rousseau reimagined the social contract theory. But here lies the key. Even though Locke rooted natural rights in God, liberalism's structure did not require God for its internal coherence. Its logic could run without him. And so in time, later thinkers removed the divine foundation while keeping the political edifice. What began as rights endowed by the Creator became rights endowed by man or government. Liberalism spread through revolutions, American and French, and then by empire, trade, and law. It reshaped constitutions, parliaments, and commerce. It also is universalist. Liberal rights are claimed for all people everywhere. Out of this framework rose humanism in the 19th century. Thinkers like Ludwig Feuerbach, Auguste Comte, and John Stuart Mill argued that morality and meaning could be grounded in man himself without God. Where liberalism provided the political order, humanism provided the cultural creed. Man as the measure, progress as the goal, reason and science as supreme authority. What do they ask of their adherents? Liberalism demands tolerance and private autonomy. Humanism demands faith in progress, reason, and the belief that man can be his own end. Together, liberalism and humanism became the operating system of the modern West, embodied in government constitutions, universities, media, and global institutions like the United Nations. They still dominate Western institutions, and they still claim universality, but their claim is fragile, for liberalism allows no absolute truth but its own relativism, and humanism insists that there is no end beyond man himself. Both deny Christ's lordship and cut themselves off from the source of truth they borrowed. Still, it's not all bad. Liberalism did give us some political innovations, representation, certain protections of conscience, that may yet be worth carrying forward into a rebuilt Christian order. But on their own, liberalism and humanism cannot hold. They are collapsing, and yet still insisting all people should be liberal and humanist, though they can no longer credibly explain why. Let's move on to our fourth idea. Marxism arose in the 19th century, where Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels argued that history is driven by class struggle, that conflict between those who own the means of protection and those who labor under them. Their great works, the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital, set forth a vision of a revolutionary change. Capitalism would inevitably collapse, and a classless, stateless society would emerge. In many ways, Marxism can be seen as an offshoot of liberalism. Where liberalism proclaimed equality in the political sphere, Marxism claimed to press those ideals to their logical conclusion in the economic sphere. If all men are equal, Marx asked, why should private property, capital, and class divisions persist? Unlike religions rooted in divine revelation, Marxism presented itself as scientific socialism, an inevitable law of history. Its gospel was not redemption from sin, but liberation from exploitation. Its prophets were the revolutionary vanguard who awakened the workers to their true condition. Its teleos was not heaven, but communism on earth. What does Marxism ask of its people? Total loyalty to the collective and to the revolutionary cause. It demands the subordination of individual identity, family, and faith to class struggle. The party became the conscience, the guide, and the judge. And in its exclusivity, Marxism tolerates no rivals. Religion is dismissed as the opiate of the masses, and competing truths are crushed as obstacles to progress. Over the last century, Marxism spread through revolution, wars, and ideology, shaping regimes from the Soviet Union to Mao's China, Cuba, Vietnam, and beyond. Today, it continues to influence academic theory, activist movements, and governments in countries such as China, North Korea, and Cuba. Like liberalism, it is not regional but universalist, pressing outward with a global vision for a classless humanity. Now, let's move forward to discuss how each of these four ideas can be weakened and ultimately hollowed out by forces from within, what I call internal subversions. Every great idea faces corruptions from within, such as elites succumbing to greed and power, movements hardening into bureaucracies. Truth can be compromised for convenience. For example, Christianity faces scandal and disunity. Islam wrestles with sectarianism. Liberalism fractures into endless litigation of rights. Marxism degenerates into authoritarianism. And alongside these, there are parasitic forces like fascism or ethno-nationalism, which do not offer total civilizational visions, thus not warring a place in the war of ideas framework, but they can corrupt and distort larger systems. They wear the clothes of faith or ideology, but turn it towards blood, soil, power, and revenge. Furthermore, we need to discuss the role of other religions in the war of ideas framework, and why I often categorize them as internal subversions. These faiths and traditions do not seek global dominance, but still shape societies in profound ways. Hinduism, with nearly 1 billion adherents, is overwhelmingly regional, centered in India. It rarely pushes outwards as a universal creed, but its nationalist expression today profoundly shapes Indian politics and its posture towards Christianity, Islam, and the liberal order. Judaism, though small in number, exerts influence in law, politics, and culture, often working to secure the survival and flourishing of the Jewish people rather than offering a universal vision for mankind. These systems are not civilizational combatants in the global war of ideas, but they complicate the battlefield. They can strengthen their host societies or steer them in directions that weaken the dominant power. They act like currents beneath the surface, sometimes aligning, sometimes resisting, but always pursuing their own people's benefit above the larger ideological struggle. And then there are forces pressing in from without. I call these external pressures. They are not ideologies themselves, but destabilizers. For example, demographic explosion in Africa, mass migration without assimilation, cultural disruptions, or rapid technological upheavals. These external pressures cause chaos, which can create opportunities and vulnerabilities. A collapsing birth rate in Europe weakens liberal humanism and Christianity, while explosive growth in Africa fuels Islam and evangelical Christianity. Mass migration destabilizes societies, and any combatant can use it as a weapon. Technology accelerates cultural change so fast that institutions cannot keep pace. And then there is drift, the way ideas mutate over time. For example, liberalism begins rooted in natural law and even biblical references, but drifted into secular humanism, and then into radical progressivism, and finally into Marxism itself. Islam absorbs nationalism in some regions, losing its universal focus. Christianity in the West is hollowed into vague moralism, what some call Christianity without Christ, that is a form of liberalism and humanism. Marxism, which once demanded pure revolution, now survives in hybrid forms. In China as nationalism plus state capital, in the West as cultural critique in the universities, that sits at the border between Marxism and liberalism humanism. Ideological drift makes the war harder to read. It blurs the battle lines. Enemies can merge, mutate, or hollow out into shells of themselves. A movement may look like one thing on the surface, but be driven by another at its core. Now, some of you might ask, is this really a war? Don't these ideas just live side by side? Can't the Marxist, the Muslim, the secular humanist, and the Christian simply agree to disagree? Isn't that the message on the bumper stickers? Coexist? But the truth is, these visions cannot coexist indefinitely at pure strength. Why? Because each claims ultimate authority over the meaning of life and the destiny of man. And ultimate claims do not stay politely in their lanes. They demand everything. Marxism says religion must be silenced, that faith is a tool of oppression, and the state must rule all. Islam says Christ is not Lord, and every society must submit to Sharia. Liberalism and humanism says no truth can be absolute, except its own claim that relativism must govern public life. And Christianity says Christ is Lord of all, and that every person in every nation owes him allegiance. These cannot all be true. They cannot all be ultimate. And because they compete for the same ground, for laws, for schools, for culture, even for souls, they collide. And history and current events bear it out. For example, Christians in Nigeria slaughtered by Islamist militias. Uyghur Muslims imprisoned in Marxist China's camps. French journalists massacred at Charlie Hebdo for daring to draw Muhammad. Students and teachers in America disciplined for refusing to bow to gender ideology. These ideas are colliding now in the courts, in the media, in entertainment, in the streets. This is why we speak of a war, not a metaphorical one, but a real conflict with real weapons, real battlefields, real casualties. Ideas fight through propaganda, through law, through censorship, through indoctrination, through violence. So this is not theory, it's a war. And wars don't stay static. Given enough time, there are winners and losers. So if this war is real, and these four powers cannot coexist, then we need to ask, what is it that people are actually fighting for? What kind of future does each vision hold out as its prize? Because no one bleeds, no one kills, no one sacrifices for abstractions. They fight for a vision of civilization. And so now, we turn to those rival visions for humanity. This time, we'll go in reverse order and start with the youngest. Marxism offers a sweeping promise. History itself is on your side. You are oppressed, but liberation is inevitable. Tear down the structures of exploitation, seize the means of production, and humanity will at last be free. No classes, no hierarchies, no rich or poor, just equality, solidarity, and justice on earth. It's a powerful vision. Think of the 19th century factory worker, bent over machines 12 hours a day, hearing that they were not merely victims, but the vanguards of history. Think of students in the 1960s, enraged at injustice, hearing that their rebellion placed them on the right side of destiny. Even now, our own culture echoes Marxist cadences. Smash the system, abolish capitalism, decolonize everything, end whiteness. The dream is always the same, a final, perfect liberation. But here's the flaw baked into the idea. In Marxism, the individual does not matter. What matters is the collective, whether it's the working class, your identity, the revolution, the march of history. You are not a person made in God's image. You are a unit in the struggle. And if the struggle demands your sacrifice, then so be it. That's why the record of Marxism is not an accident. It flows directly from this principle. If the end is utopia, then the means are justified. If history demands revolution, then gulags, executions, purges, and famines are not atrocities. They are just the price of progress. The evidence is staggering. The Soviet Union, 20 million dead under Stalin's purges, gulags, and manufactured famines. Mao's China, 30 million starved in the Great Leap Forward. Cambodia, a quarter of the population was executed or worked to death in 4 years under Pol Pot. And even in so-called less extreme cases like Cuba, Marxism reduced a beautiful nation to poverty and repression and drove many into exile. Venezuela, once one of Latin America's richest nations, now a place where children scavenge for food while millions flee across the border. These are not accidents. They are the fruits of the Marxist vision. Why does it keep happening? Because Marxism denies the irreducible worth of the individual. It worships the people as an abstraction, but crushes people in reality. It dreams of heaven on earth, but without God. So it makes the party, the state, the revolution, the identity into its God. And gods demand sacrifices. This is Marxism's vision for civilization. Not flourishing, not freedom, but perpetual revolution. A world where justice is always promised, never delivered. Where history itself is the highest power, and human beings are expendable offerings on its altar. It promises utopia, but it cannot escape its own logic. When the individual is nothing, tyranny is everything. Next comes liberalism and its close partner, humanism. Their promise is deeply attractive. Liberalism declares you are free. You belong to yourself. No king may rule your conscience. No priest may bind your soul. No tyrant may own your body. Government exists only by your consent, and its duty is to protect your rights. Humanism adds the cultural creed. We do not need God to live meaningful lives. Man himself is the measure, reason the authority, and progress the destiny. At its best, the vision achieved great things. It broke the divine right of tyrant kings. It enshrined constitutions and parliaments. It protected freedom of speech, press, assembly, and worship. It unleashed science, technology, and commerce on a scale no civilization had ever known. The American experiment itself was born in part of this vision. But here's the fatal flaw. Liberalism and humanism took truths that were once grounded in God, human dignity, natural rights, moral law, and severed them from their source. They said, yes, men are equal, but equal because we say so, not because they are made in God's image. Yes, you are free, but free without a higher purpose. Yes, progress is real, but progress towards what? No one can say. And without God, without telos, the vision slowly hollows out. Freedom becomes license. Rights multiply, but lose coherence. Tolerance curdles into coercion, as the state must enforce endless claims of identity and autonomy. The individual, once liberated from the king and priest, finds himself enslaved instead to appetites, to bureaucracies, to technology. And then the decay inverts. Liberalism doesn't just weaken, it produces absurdities that no sane society can defend. Look at Sweden, where sexual assaults have skyrocketed with mass migration, and police warn women to stay home. Yet citizens who protest risk prosecution for so-called hate speech. Or look at America, where pornographic books in schools is defended as inclusive and freedom of speech. And finally, consider the absurdity of the United Kingdom. Carry pepper spray for self-defense, and you can be charged with a crime. But when grooming gangs of rapists from immigrant communities were exposed in towns like Rotherham, officials gave them slaps on the wrist, excusing their abuse on the grounds of cultural unfamiliarity. Protecting women is criminalized, while excusing predatory men is tolerated in the name of tolerance. And the UK's shame goes further. Christians have been arrested for silently praying outside abortion clinics. Not shouting, not blocking anyone, not even speaking, simply bowing their heads in prayer. Think about that. In a so-called liberal democracy, a person can be jailed for thoughts directed to God to save the lives of children. A society that calls that justice is not free. It's insane. That is not a bug of liberalism. It's a trajectory. Because once rights are severed from God, There is no guarantor of them except government, and government feels no hesitation redefining them to suit its purposes. Today, the right to free speech becomes the duty to use preferred pronouns. Tomorrow, the right to life becomes the right to abortion, and then the right to assisted suicide, all in the name of progress. And here's where the danger lies. When rights are unmoored from God, they are no longer rights at all. They are permissions, granted or withdrawn at the pleasures of the state. And the state, swollen with technocratic power, begins to play God. Liberalism without God does not end in liberty. It ends in bureaucracy, surveillance, and coercion. It lays the groundwork for tyrannical technocracies, and in many cases slides straight into Marxism. So what is liberalism and humanism's vision of civilization? A society of individuals, each defining truth for themselves. Families fragile, communities fractured, justice inverted, and behind it all, a government that claims to guarantee your rights, but in reality, rewrites them at will. It promised liberty, but liberty without God is ludicrous, and in the end, it's not liberty at all. Now we turn to Islam. Islam offers a compelling promise, peace through submission. The very word Islam comes from salam, peace, but peace found only when life is brought under obedience to Allah's law. Where Christianity speaks of freedom in Christ, Islam speaks of order through surrender. The vision is total, no separation between mosque and state, no division between faith and law. Worship, family, politics, courts, even clothing, all under one canopy. The promise is unity, one God, one law, one people. For those disillusioned with the chaos of modern life, that clarity is deeply attractive. Islam offers certainty in an age of confusion. But here lies the flaw. In demanding total submission, Islam flattens freedom. You are not a son or a daughter invited into the Father's love. You are a servant bound to obey. The dignity of conscience, the freedom to seek truth, the creativity of culture, all must bow before conformity. Dissent is not tolerated, only suppressed. Apostasy is punished by death in many Islamic states. Criticism of the Prophet or Quran is blasphemy, often met with prison, violence, or execution. And the methods of execution can often be brutal. In Iran and Afghanistan, stonings and public hangings still occur. In Saudi Arabia, executions are carried out by beheading, sometimes followed by crucifixion, with the body displayed in public. ISIS, when it ruled large swaths of Iraq and Syria, went even further, filming prisoners being burned alive, beheaded, or crucified as spectacles of terror. These barbaric practices are not relics of history. They are sentences carried out in our own time. Now, it's important to be clear and fair. Not every Muslim lives this way or believes these things. Millions of ordinary Muslims around the world do not practice or endorse radical forms of Islam. Many desire peace, raise their families with love, and live as good neighbors. We should honor that truth. But we must also be honest. When Islam becomes dominant in public life, the trajectory again and again bends towards suffocation and control. The exceptions do not erase the pattern. Left unchecked, its totalizing vision tends to harden into oppression. And nowhere is this suppression clearer than in the lives of women. Across much of the Islamic world, women live under constant pressure or outright threat of honor killings if they are seen as bringing shame to their families. In countries like Afghanistan, they are forced under full body coverings so extreme they erase all identity, turning a human being into a faceless silhouette. I once saw a photograph, a father and his young son laughing and playing in the surf at the beach, both in swim trunks, free and unencumbered. A few yards away, the mother stood watching, wrapped head to toe in the face covering, face veiled, unable to join them in the water or in their joy. That is not modesty. That is imprisonment. Imagine being forced to walk through the heat of sand and sun, trapped in suffocating black fabric, forbidden to share in the joy of your own child. This is not dignity. It is bondage dressed up as virtue. And the cost isn't just personal freedom. It is civilizational creativity. In its earlier centuries, the Muslim world gave us algebra, advances in medicine, astronomy, and architecture. But those contributions belong to the distant past. As orthodoxy hardened, inquiry stalled. Today, In a world driven by science and technology, when was the last time the Muslim world produced a major breakthrough that reshaped the state of the art? Centuries have passed since its high point, and the stagnation is telling. A vision that demands conformity inevitably suffocates innovation. And worse still, this suppression does not stop with the future. It reaches back to destroy the past. In its zeal for purity, radical Islam has often turned its fury against art, history, and even its own heritage. The city of Mecca, once filled with centuries of sacred Islamic sites, was bulldozed by Saudi authorities in the last century, leaving only the Great Mosque, now overshadowed by luxury hotels and shopping malls. Across Iraq and Syria, ISIS dynamited ancient temples, smashed statues, and reduced libraries to ash. Even Islamic shrines were leveled if they were judged impure. What kind of vision fears beauty and memory so much that it must erase them? This is not reverence. It is vandalism against its own civilization. And this totalizing impulse does not stop at the borders of Muslim lands. It asserts itself in the West as well. Take Salman Rushdie. Back in 1988, he published a novel called The Satanic Verses. Many Muslims saw it as mocking the Prophet Muhammad, and the Iran's Ayatollah issued a fatwa, a religious order calling for his death. For years, Rushdie lived under protection, and people assumed the danger had faded. But in 2022, more than 30 years later, Rushdie was attacked on stage in New York and nearly killed. He lost the sight in one eye and the use of a hand. Think about that. A Western author in America, decades after writing a novel, almost murdered because Islam's vision will not tolerate defiance anywhere in the world. So what is Islam's civilizational vision? It offers order, unity, and clarity, but only by suffocating freedom, erasing beauty, and enforcing conformity. It produces societies where dissent is crushed, women live in fear, creativity withers, and even history itself is bulldozed. And perhaps the saddest part of all is what it does to the human spirit. Marxism, for all its tyranny, still produces art, though always bent into propaganda. Liberalism still creates, though too often shallow and unmoored. Christianity has given the world cathedrals, icons, music, and poetry. But Islam, in its dominant trajectory, suffocates imagination. It bulldozes its own history, forbids beauty that does not serve law, and leaves behind not flourishing, but sterility. It promises peace, but peace only for those who submit. It promises order, but only at the cost of joy, freedom, and hope. It is, in the end, a vision of civilization without life. And at last, we come to Christianity. Christianity offers a vision unlike any other. It begins not with submission to a code or absorption into a collective, but with a person, a God who made us in his image, who entered into history as Jesus Christ, who died and rose again so that we might live. In Christianity, you are not a servant crushed under law, or a unit in the march of history, or a solitary atom of autonomy. You are a child of the Father, loved, redeemed, and destined for eternity. The vision Christianity offers is freedom, but not the empty freedom of liberalism, freedom as license. No, it's freedom ordered to the good. Freedom to live as you were made. Freedom to love God and neighbor. Freedom that finds its fulfillment in truth. It is justice rooted not in envy or coercion, but in the unshakable dignity of every human life, because every person bears the image of God. This vision produces beauty, from the soaring Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris to the ceilings of the Sistine Chapel, from Handel's Messiah to Negro spirituals sung in the dark fields of slavery. Christianity has unleashed art that still lifts the human soul centuries later. It produces compassion. The first hospitals, orphanages, and charities in the Western world were Christian inventions, built on the conviction that every life matters, especially the weakest. It produces learning. The university system itself was born out of the Christian hunger to know God and his creation. And it produces courage. From the martyrs of Rome to missionaries in hostile lands, Christians have laid down their lives to witness to a love stronger than death. And here's the proof of its power. Wherever Christianity has taken root, it has lifted societies. It ended the gladiatorial games, elevated the status of women, outlawed infanticide, and eventually supplied the moral firepower that abolished slavery. It gave the world the idea of universal human rights, not as man's invention, but as God's gift. And even in the face of corruption, hypocrisy, or decline, Christianity has again and again renewed itself, reforming hearts, restoring nations, rekindling hope. And that's a unique strength of Christianity, its ability to renew itself. We know not every Christian, nor every Christian society, has lived or governed honorably. Failures and sins are real. But here's what makes Christianity special and why it's a strong foundation for civilization. We are not left without a standard. We have the model of the perfect person, God incarnate in Jesus Christ. His life and his teachings do not change, and they stand at the very center of our faith, which means our failures do not redefine Christianity. They are judged by it. And so, whenever we drift, we are always called back to Christ's perfect vision for us. What is the vision Christianity offers? A civilization rooted in truth, radiant with beauty, ordered by love, and animated by hope. Not utopia on earth, but a foretaste of heaven, a kingdom that begins now and is fulfilled in eternity. A society where law is tempered by mercy, power is checked by humility, and freedom is anchored by purpose. Compared to Marxism's gulags, liberalism's confusion, or Islam's suffocating submission, Christianity alone offers a vision that gives life rather than takes it. It says you are not an accident, not a slave, not a number. You are beloved. And the civilization it builds is the only one that can endure because it rests not on man, but on the living God. This is why Christianity is not just one contender among many in the war of ideas. It is the only vision that truly sustains life, liberty, beauty, and joy. It is the only hope for civilization's renewal, and it is why, in the end, Christianity must prevail. So as we close, we have seen the four great visions for the future of humanity. Marxism, promising justice but delivering the grave. Liberalism and humanism, promising liberty but dissolving into madness. Islam, promising peace but giving you chains. And Christianity, offering life, beauty, hope, and joy. Do not mistake this for theory. These are not four neat options waiting for us to choose at our leisure. They are powers already shaping the world. They are pumping out propaganda, rewriting laws, redefining freedoms, demanding allegiances. And Christians in particular know this well. We feel the pressure. We see the hostility. We know our beliefs are mocked and restricted in the West, while our brothers and sisters overseas bleed for their faith every day. Which leads to the questions we'll answer in the next transmission. We'll pull out the map and ask, where are these visions advancing? Where are they retreating? Who is winning the war of ideas? And what does it mean for us who must take our place in it? Because the war is not coming. The lines are drawn. It's raging now, and it's accelerating. So each Christian will have to answer, where will I make my stand? And how will I fight? That's next time on The Restless Signal. You've been listening to the Restless Signal podcast. Copyright 2025, all rights reserved. Check us out on the web at therestlesssignal.com.